Hey everybody, welcome back to The Way I See It. This week I want to talk about honesty without hate. I want to speak to facts, feelings, and the responsibility to tell the difference. So today's episode is all about gender, where biology ends and belief begins. Now I know it's a touchy subject, so I want to talk about it calmly and as clearly as possible. Because I think, once you strip away all the buzzwords and the emotional charge, this issue really isn't that complicated. From a biological standpoint, human beings come in two sexes, male and female. And that's based on how our bodies are structured and, of course, how reproduction works. Males, we produce sperm. Females produce eggs. Every cell in your body is organized around one of these two functions. Every cell. And that's not belief, that's biology. So people often point to rare medical conditions and they challenge this. But those are exactly that. They're rare medical conditions. Now medicine medicine recognizes exceptions without pretending the underlying rule disappears. Being born with a variation doesn't create a category or a new category of human any more than being born with 12 toes changes what it means to be human. And I know a few people with 12 toes. Acknowledging biological reality doesn't deny anyone's humanity. It simply tells the truth about the body. Where things start to get confusing is when biology gets mixed with psychology and personal identity. Lately, we're being told that how someone feels about themselves should override their physical reality. Now feelings are real. I get that. Feelings matter. They deserve empathy. But feelings are not the same as facts. Absolutely not. In science and in medicine, reality doesn't change based on emotion. Instead, we acknowledge emotions while remaining honest about the body. And that distinction, that matters. And what's commonly referred to as gender or sex today is largely about identity, self-perception, and personal expression. And those are psychological and social experiences, not biological ones. So when we blur the line between sex and identity, we don't create clarity, we create confusion. It's like confusing a car's paint job with the engine. You can paint the outside of the car any color you want, but it doesn't change what's under the hood. Adults in a free society, they can make their own choices. They can choose how they live and how they express themselves. That's not the core concern here. The real concern is when those ideas that are still being actively debated without long-term conclusive evidence are presented to children as settled fact. Now, I've seen it in medicine. When we're uncertain about long-term outcomes, what do? we slow down. We gather data. We ask the hard questions. And then we proceed carefully. Now, to me, that's not cruelty. That's responsibility. And that responsibility matters most when children are involved. And I think that way because kids don't have the ability to weigh lifelong consequences. Now, another red flag is, the moment questioning becomes forbidden, that's an issue. You see, real science invites scrutiny. It welcomes debate. And if ideas can't be questioned without social punishment, well, I'm afraid then we're no longer talking about science. We're talking about beliefs. And the belief systems, they shouldn't be enforced by shame or by fear. We can all respect people, without denying biology. You can show compassion without pretending that the facts don't exist. And, most importantly, we can protect children without attacking adults. None of it requires hatred. None of it requires mockery. None of it requires cruelty. What it does require is honesty. 100% honesty. A society that replaces facts with feelings or treats disagreement as harm, well, it isn't progressing. It's avoiding reality. And, history shows us that avoiding reality, well, we all know it never ends well. I'm talking about this in very simple terms because I think it should be very simple. We can acknowledge human dignity. We should treat people with kindness and still speak clearly about biology. Those two things are not enemies. If we lose the ability to talk honestly, without the slogans, without the fear, without pretending the complexity where there isn't any, well, then we're really not having conversations anymore, are we? We're just repeating, those old stagnant or approved phrases. And unfortunately, then we become sheep. At least that's the way I see it. I'm Michael Baumler. I'm out.